Okay, let's talk chapter 1, the law. So when we begin with law, we begin in natural law. And these are like the law of physics, what we call natural law. So you drop an apple out of a tree, it's going to go to the ground. And so law operates in the same fashion. And that's the basis of our American common law. We just haven't seen it in 150 years. Okay? One of the most important components of law is that if you have a conflict, you tell everybody. And so that's why you often see this on documents. Notice to principals is notice to agents. Notice to agents is notice to principals. It basically says under Ezekiel 33, tell everybody, I have a word, and if you don't spread it, it's going to affect you. Okay, and we'll find that truth is sovereign. Okay, so it's important that we tell those that need to know about the conflict. If not, we're not fully disclosing. And that is fraud. That's the lie. So the next thing we want to recognize is that on our land and soil, we have a precedent in Cruden versus Neal. And this early 1800s land precedent said, hey, until you've got a contract, you're not subject to any laws other than natural law, what comes from our Creator. We don't see this often cited because we get caught up in contracts. Those contracts subject us to the different kinds of law. And we're going to get into that in our presentation and where do we stand. So next, let's talk about maxims. So we have a number of maxims in law, things that are just true. And so when we're trading with one another and we're operating in commerce, this is a jurisdiction, and the laws of commerce come from the intellectual property of the Pope and the Roman Curia. Okay, so that's got rules with it associated and maxims in commerce. And the maxims start off with truth is sovereign. Okay, that's just self-evident. But how we enter and exit a conflict determines whether or not we have standing in order to talk about the conflict or resolve it. So those are very important, and you would be well versed to go do a Google search on the 10 maxims in commerce, because we're not taught that. Next, we have some other maxims, such as the creation is not greater than the creator. So things like corporations are just pieces of paper, they're fiction. So fiction is not greater than something that is living. That's important as we think about our law. And I already mentioned that all the commerce, all the corporations, incorporations, that's all the intellectual property of the Pope and the Roman Curia. So a thing is done, so must it be undone. So if we sign a contract, or one signed on our behalf, then we have to undo this in order to get back to our status as Cruden versus Neal. We don't have any contracts. A couple more maxims that we want to be familiar with, as we talk, is that fraud vitiates everything. And in ancient Roman, it vitiates everything from the beginning, ab initio. So if you make this claim, if I wasn't given full disclosure, I wasn't given the full truth, I didn't get notice to principals, notice to agents, and vice versa, then I can claim fraud, and that undoes the contract. That's a very powerful weapon we can use. Next, we have, where does our law come from? Our origins of law are in our belief system, in our religion. And the Romans and the Roman Church has a very profound impact on the law that we have today, because most of our treaties and our financial institutions are based upon the ancient unum sanctum. And I have that here at the bottom. In 1302, Pope Boniface realized that, hey, Jesus isn't here any longer, so I'm going to put the whole world in a trust. And we're going to manage the trust based upon the jurisdictions we find in the biblical book of Genesis. So we have jurisdictions of law, land, air, and water. So man lives on the land. Okay, that's where my 2 feet are, is living man. I breathe the water, or breathe the air, and I have to have the water in my cells in order to function. So I have general jurisdiction over all three of those, but they are separate and unique in terms of the treaties that were signed. So we'll get into those. First, let's describe those different jurisdictions. And this was actually carried forward from the original Treaty of Trieste, and you won't even find that if you Google it. So let's talk about land. And you'll notice that land is the first L. So if we have land, air, and water, we have the word law. So if you didn't know that, then this is an important piece of your education that's been missing. So in the land jurisdiction, we have the land is linked to the soil. The top 6 inches is where we live as man. Okay? If I'm 6 foot under, then you know I'm in a different place. I'm dead and I'm under the ground. Okay? So the only living jurisdiction is the soil, which is tied to the land. If you remove the top 6 inches, then you get another 6 inches of soil. Okay, it just works that way. And this was administered by the Spanish law of the Inquisition. And so the Spanish king was to administer land grants. And so if you go back and look at the history of the land, your chain of title, you'll see that originally that the land was granted to the United States grants it to the railroad, and then the people. But then somewhere in the 1800s, early 1900s, you see that that next sale goes to deed. And that's because the king decided that he was going to take over for the management. And so you get a deed, which is not really ownership. You get a deed to the name of the property instead of the actual land. But that's important. So that's the land jurisdiction. And I'm going to be putting land in a bucket here. I'm not able to go outside today because of the weather. So I'm going to just pretend that we're going to put some land. Everything's falling over on me. So we're going to put some land into our land bucket. Next we have the air jurisdiction. While I'm going here, let me just grab some air, put it in here. Our air jurisdiction. And of course, air is something we can't grab hold of, and we are not birds. If we jump off of a cliff, we die. Okay? So this is a dead jurisdiction to the living. The Pope, because we have belief in religion, the Pope decided that he wanted to administer the air jurisdiction. And so we also see that air is above land and water, and so the air jurisdiction is the highest law in the world. And we call it actual global jurisdiction. In the air jurisdiction, we have a number of fictional things that are created. We've talked about how commerce and all of the corporate documents are fictions. They are not real things. Things that we create from those, such as the usufructs, and this is short for use of the fruits. So if a corporation is created in your name, then it is a usufruct. And that's opposed to appellation. Me, a living man, my parents gave me an appellation, a name that represents me, the living man. So this is very critical because if we apply the wrong law, then they can take advantage of this. Because things like deeds, mortgages, debt, all those things don't carry with me when I die. So why would they pass on to my children or to others? So think about that as we move through, because this is what we call the law of kinds from Genesis. So the Pope manages that. That's our air jurisdiction. So I'm going to put the air here. Right here. And then we finally have the water jurisdiction. And of course, the the water, the oceans connect us, the seas. Those are kind of synonymous terms. But out on the high seas, right, the middle of the ocean, is where maritime law applies. And that, again, is the Pope's jurisdiction. But when we're close to the land, then we have admiralty. And the King of England came to the United States and applied his law to our water and our land. And that's a process called usurping. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the admiralty is what applies to that water that is close to that touches the land. And we, of course, are not fish of the sea, so this is a dead jurisdiction. If we breathe water, we'll die. But we have general jurisdiction over all three, because we breathe the air, we drink the water, it goes into our cells, and we stand and live on the land and soil. So this will be our water jurisdiction. Our next important law term is standing. So what law is used and applies to us is based upon our standing. Okay? This is critical. I'm a man, a living man. I stand on 2 feet. Oh, but wait, I'm not a living man. I'm entrapped by a corporate veil. I don't get to experience prudent versus Neil. But because all of my contracts were done fraudulently, I can claim they were fraud. Ab initio. And so I remove the corporate veil, and so now I'm a man standing on the land and soil. And if I've done that properly, I can gain access to the other forms of law. So let's talk about our standing. Literally, here you see the footprints. So, when I have a contract and I go onto the land, right, if I put 1 foot here, I'm on the soil and on the land. The land is dead, but I still have at least 1 foot, right? And remember, these are always linked. So think of this, I put a hole in my bucket here. So I can always get back to the soil with my foot, right? It's always attached. Next, we have the air jurisdiction. Okay, I can get to commerce. I have a foot on the land and soil, and I can have another foot in the air. Okay, then when I'm in here, the law of the air jurisdiction applies. Commerce. Okay, as opposed to water. Again, if I go into the water jurisdiction, okay, I've got a foot in the water. But I still always have